Also today, the search for a sustainable future. How has China's incredible growth impacted on its population? And can that growth continue? That's coming up. Well, today, rich and poor countries alike have agreed to finance new sustainable development goals at a UN summit in Ethiopia. But no agreement could be credible without China's backing. After 3 decades of high-speed growth, the world's biggest country faces a major challenge if it's to deal with environmental damage that's been caused by that economic expansion. Our China editor Carrie Gracie reports now from Hunan province in central China on the country's search for sustainability.
Water, the life giver, but here it's a silent killer. Yangjiqing's water is polluted with industrial waste. This land was once known as China's basket of rice and fish, but it's also rich in minerals. So as China became the factory to the world, chemical and metal industries moved in here. Untreated effluent in the water, heavy metals in the soil, sulfur dioxide in the air. A fifth of China's farmland is contaminated. And Yangjiqing complains her crops are all bad.
Here in this village, many people have cancer. 3 people died in 3 months. They were all so young. It's so toxic here.
China's often congratulated for pulling hundreds of millions from poverty. But wealth has come at a heavy price. Unregulated smokestack industries have ravaged the environment and damaged the health of generations. But now polluting factories are being demolished. China has said creating jobs and turning a profit can no longer come at the expense of public health.
No more economic growth stained by blood. Under the new environmental law, every factory has to be approved before it is built. No more unregulated chaos.
Just one of the factories forced to move away from Mrs. Yang's fields into a new industrial zone. In the old days, minerals for enamel paints were mixed by hand, and no one wore a mask. But the consequences of China's industrial revolution are harder to overcome. At only 3 years old, Yang Yang has 3 times the safe level of lead in his blood. No sign of the factory next door moving. His health endangered by the air, food and water that should nourish him. China has a long way to go to make good on its promise to children like Yang Yang. Sustainable development in which every life counts. Carrie Gracie, BBC News, Hunan Province.
Well, to discuss this further, we can go to New York and speak to Blackburn-Dwyer, who's managing editor of the website globalcitizen.org. That's a non-government organisation dedicated to ending global poverty. Brandon, thank you very much for speaking to us here on Impact. As our China editor Carrie Gracie was saying, China is congratulated for pulling hundreds of millions of people from poverty, but that wealth has come at a terrible price to people's health. Would you agree with that statement?
Of course it has. If you look at the history of any industrialization in any country in the world, industrialization comes at a human cost. Historically, the United States, the UK have all faced that. We just faced it 150 years ago. China is facing it in the last 50 years. And what they've been faced with doing is pulling hundreds of millions instead of hundreds of thousands out of extreme poverty. But it does have a cost.
I just want to put to you a statement made by Premier Li this March. He was saying that environmental pollution is a blight on people's quality of life. We must fight it with all our might. What do you feel when you hear that? Is that just rhetoric, or is this a government really dedicated to putting economic growth perhaps on a slower dial to look after the environment and to make it sustainable?
I'm going to say both. It's a government that's very dedicated to improving the quality of life, particularly for its middle class and upper income citizens. But it's probably not a country that is really willing to put all out growth behind the idea of quality growth.
Okay, I just want to put to you a piece written by your organisation recently. It said that we're talking about air pollution, and it said just 19 of the 74 major cities met air quality standards on a daily basis. But according to your organisation, that was great news because it was only 5 the year before. You do see this as progress?
You have to see it as progress. I mean, the definition of progress is it better than the previous period that you measured something? So if you go from 5 cities last June to 19 cities this June, then that's progress. Is it where we need it to be? Is it where we want it to be? Absolutely not. You're still looking at 75% of China's major cities facing consistent air quality conditions that are blatantly unhealthy. So China has a long way to go. They've admitted they have a long way to go. And part of the problem is they've said, look, we're not even going to get past the 50% mark before the year 2030. Now, that's not as fast as its citizenry wants it to be, and it's not as fast as I want it to be, but you have to be pragmatic at some point. Getting all of these cities to improve their air qualities with all of the challenges of maintaining growth and finding new employment opportunities for millions of people a year does make it difficult. So for the moment, we can applaud 5 to 19 as progress, but next year we're going to be hoping that there's more progress than that.
Brandon, just briefly on the wider sustainability goals. I know your organisation does a lot of work on these sorts of issues. They're lovely ambitions that have been announced, eradicating poverty and hunger by 2030. I mean, are they just lovely ambitions? Is there anything, any meat behind them?
There's absolutely meat behind them. And the way I know that is being able to look at the last 15 to 20 years. In 1990, people talked about cutting extreme poverty in half in the next 30 years. And it's 2015. And what have we done? We've cut extreme poverty in half. This shows that it is possible to do these things. In the 1980s, people said, we're going to eradicate polio. Well, today, 99% of all polio has been eradicated. Now, that 1% is very important to keep focusing on. But these big goals are what is the moral obligation of our society to be doing. So when you look at the global goals that will guide the next 15 years of international development, yes, they're lofty, they're ambitious, they should be. The trick is, can we get governments to not only sign them at the United Nations in September, but can we get governments to take concrete steps immediately to start implementing? That's the real challenge. When you look at the Millennium Development Goals of the last 15 years, it took the average government 5 to 6 years to really start taking steps, and yet we did see huge successes. So we believe if we can start on October 1st to start seeing governments actually take steps to accomplish these global goals, that the year 2030 can see the end of extreme poverty.
Brandon Blackburn-Dwyer, thank you very much for speaking to us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.